Hello everyone and welcome to Patchwork Quilts with Diane. This week's video is a little bit different from my usual content. I did think twice about whether to show it or not, but I did promise to put a video out every week, and this is what happened this week. It's sort of a warts and all video, so it's a bit ugly in places. I have been quilting for a long time, longer than I care to remember, but sometimes things just go wrong, and I've got to say that it's my fault, really, totally, because I have one of those personalities where I consider myself to be a problem solver, which is fine. Most things can be solved, but occasionally this attitude of thinking, well, I'll sort that out, don't worry about that, I'll sort that out, can make matters worse, and they did on this occasion. But if you're not interested in any of that sort of thing, if you fast forward to about halfway, you'll see there's a section on Controlled Improv Blocks. I think that's what they're calling it now. And that was more successful so far. So the week started okay. I just finished the stripy heart quilt, and there was some tidying up to do in my room, and there were some scraps of material left on the ironing board, and I thought I would come in and process them into the usual sizes that I process my scraps in. And then I had an idea that instead of cutting them up and processing them, I would use every thin slither, pieces that perhaps normally I wouldn't keep, and I would make a Project Linus quilt. So that is the premise of this story. So there's only small pieces. I'm just sewing these thin slithers into long strips and joining them together, and we'll see what happens. Well, it's 17 inches wide, and I've used all of the pinks that were left over, and it's about 43, just over 43 inches long. So I'm going to have a look now and see what's in the Project Linus box, and I'm going to put some fabric on each side. Well, I didn't have anything in my Project Linus stash that would be suitable to go on each side of those stripes down the centre, so I've just put some of the leftover wide back that I used to back the stripy heart quilt, and I think that makes quite a nice modern Project Linus top. So up to this point everything was going okay. I didn't foresee any problems. I used all the scraps. I was feeling quite pleased with myself. I thought it looked quite attractive. And then I heard about bagging out. Well, I've just decided that I think for this quilt I'm going to try the bagging out method. So I haven't done that before. So I think the reason I chose to try this bagging out method was because I was a bit short on fabric, and in principle I'd seen it, you just complete your quilt and then you sew around all four sides, leaving an opening, and then you bag it out, turn it inside out and sew up the sides, and it's finished. And I thought, well, that'll be a quick finish to this quilt. I haven't done it before. I looked on some of the videos on YouTube. They all seemed successful. That's why I'm making this video, because whatever I did was not successful. And I thought, well, I'll do that. The first thing I did was to put some wonder clips along the edge of the flimsy, the top part, and the batting. And then I put a very small amount of 505 spray onto the batting, and I've given it a press, and I have marked just on the outside in a white chalk a continuation of that seam line
So my intention is just to go on the right of each of those down the centre, top to bottom, press a foot width apart from the seam, and then I'll show you the next step.
So the batting or the wadding that I used in this quilt was supplied to me by Project Linus, and it's quite sturdy. It's a polyester, I think. It's not anything I normally buy, so it is quite firm. So I thought I would just quilt the top onto the batting so that it acts as one layer when I come to the bagging out, and also I'll get some nice quilting on the top. That was the plan.
So I've completed that. So far everything's looking okay. I've trimmed the batting now to the exact same size as the top and squared up the top. I did put some chalk lines just 3 inches away here and put a row of stitching so that this big area is quilted. So I've used up odd pieces of fabric to piece the back together, and I've sewn the Project Linus label on there. Okay, let's have a bash at this. Well, I'm not quite sure what's happened here. Slight miscalculation. I'm going to add another piece of fabric to the back because somehow I'm a little bit short. It's okay on the width, but the length, no. So I'll do that next.
So a slight miscalculation there. Nothing to worry about really. Didn't bother me that much. I just thought I'll put a piece on the top of the bottom and continue. And that's what I did.
So I've sorted that out now, and I've put a little piece of the pink on the top and the bottom. And now my next task is to take the backing and put it right sides together on top of the face of this quilt. Sew round all 4 sides, leaving an opening on the one side. So everything's trimmed, the wonder clips are holding things in place, and I've just put a dark mark here and there, so I will backstitch each side of that, go all the way around, finish there, so that gives me that space to turn. And before I turn it the right side out, I'm just checking that I've caught all the layers in the seams all the way around. Well, I've turned it and I've pressed it, and where the opening is, I'm just cutting out a very small piece of the batting, just so that that will close up nice and neat.
So at this point, ignorance is definitely bliss. I'm going along quite happily, following the instructions that I'd seen on YouTube, not foreseeing a problem. I would say that most of the videos I've seen on YouTube using this bagging out method, they used either a minky on the back, so that was sort of soft and squodgy and nice and warm and didn't really need quilting, or it was a smaller project and there wasn't very much quilting done. So I had already attached the flimsy, the top of the quilt, to the batting in straight line stitching, so the batting wasn't going to go anywhere. That wasn't going to fall about inside the quilt, which sometimes happens also, I've heard, using this bagging out method. And so I just thought this next bit would add a nice bit of texture to the quilt. It didn't really serve any purpose, but I just thought it might look nice. No.
Well, I've sealed up the opening and I've just put a row of stitching right near the edge. I will put another row of stitching inside, about 1/2 inch probably, but I think what I'll do now is to run another row of stitching the other side of these lines. Well, I started sewing and it wasn't too bad, but yuck, I'm not having that.
So yuck is a technical term in the sewing world. Means get out your seam ripper. And I looked at that and thought, oh my goodness, what a mess. But then I noticed that I hadn't changed my sewing foot to my walking foot. So I did think a lot of that pushing down of the fabric might have been caused because of that. And also, I didn't start in the centre of a quilt. When I put a quilt together and I'm quilting it, I always start from the centre and work to the sides. Well, on this occasion I worked from the edge and I was working across. So I thought, oh, perhaps that's the reason. Walking foot, starting in the wrong place. So mistaken. I hadn't thought this through at all, had I?
So I'm going to unpick those stitches, start again. Well, now I've changed to the walking foot and I've started from the centre and I've worked my way down and everything looks lovely.
Famous last words.
Until we get to the bottom and it's pushing all of the fabric over, and so now I've got that weird little problem there where I've strengthened that outside seam.
So now you're going to see my problem solving skills in action.
And I thought if I unpick this tight little seam on the edge, then it would allow the quilt to sort of come back on itself. So it doesn't look great, but I thought if that would solve the problem, I could live with that seam there. But my main concern is that I've got all these wrinkles occurring and I really don't like that. So my next idea is to leave the one seam here. I'll unpick these two quilting seams.
Somehow I lost that video footage, and I really did. I didn't just wipe it because, you know, I was throwing things around the room or anything like that. But what I did in the end was to take out all of those seams that adjoin the three pieces together, and I just put a little row back. I reinstated that little tiny seam at the edge, bearing in mind I'd unpicked one of those and that was size 1 stitch, so that took me ages. Couldn't even get the seam ripper in it. I had to get a needle to lift the stitch before I could cut it. But I took that out, then put that back, and then I put another seam around the outside about a 1/2 inch, because what I didn't want was the back to sort of creep around to the front. So I left it like that.
And that's the pieced back of the edge. You can see that I did put a tiny little reinforcing seam there, and then I put another one there just to give it added strength. And there are no wrinkles or creases or caught pieces, and it's not billowing out. So I think that will be okay. I'll get that washed and I'll get that sent off now to Project Liners.
But I didn't stop there. I'm not sure if you can see, there's just on that tan coloured, you can just see a little tiny nail width row of stitching. And I've put those little rows of stitching all across the quilt. I did it on the front, so I stitched in the ditch, reversing size 1 stitches again here and there, all across the whole of the quilt, so that it doesn't move, it won't come apart, the back won't be baggy. So now I'm happy that it's finished. So after I'd finished this Project Liners quilt, I needed something for me, something to cheer me up and something to sew that I didn't have to think about or problem solve. And there were a few scraps of white fabric left over. So let's talk now about Controlled Improv Quilting Blocks. Recently I completed a quilt called the Spring Equinox La Primavera, and I really enjoyed making that quilt, and I had some lovely pieces of fabric left over. And I'd also been hankering over making some improv blocks, and so I was limited with the colours, and I had greens, yellows, oranges and whites. So 4 colours really. There was a 5th one, I'll show you that in a minute. But there were 4 colours, and I would make blocks from that, just using up all of the scraps and see where that took me.
And so I managed to make 3 8-inch squares and 8 5.5-inch squares. So they're all completely different. And the only thing that connects them is that the leftover fabrics all came from the spring equinox quilt.
And this is the odd little block. So you can see there is that little square of red in the centre. Now I haven't saved that with the others because of that red, but I think I'll put it there and we'll see what happens at the end. I really like this little block though.
But what I feel like doing today is using up the scraps of white that I had left over. And in this treasure box, I keep all of my processed strips of fabric. And so they are different widths. And inside the plastic wallets, I've slipped a piece of card just to give it a little bit of body to help it stand up. And then I've colour coordinated the fabrics. So for this project, to use with that white, I'm looking for yellow, green and orange. And this is what I have. There's not a huge amount. So there's some green and some yellow in that packet. I have a bag of green strips, some orange, not too much, and then some yellow. So those are the colours that I need to make these squares.
So at this point, I have no idea what this quilt will look like. All I want to do is to make blocks, and those colours have been selected. I've also selected sizes. So my blocks were either going to be 5.5-inch square or 8-inch square. Those are the only rules I had.
So I'm just playing around with putting these fabrics together, but I'm at the stage now where I need to measure it. I've trimmed it. I keep trimming and pressing after I've added each fabric strip, and now I just have to decide on the size. Will it be a 5.5-inch square or will it be an 8-inch square? So we're at 4 3/4 by 6. So I've gone for a 5.5-inch square, and it's okay. I have to remember that I'm not going to be madly in love with every one of these blocks, but it will be how they sit together in a finished quilt. That will determine how successful the blocks are, really. So the things I like are the yellow on these little blue tits chest, and this yellow. The thing I'm not so keen on is the introduction of another colour, so there's blue on the birds, but overall I think that's okay. And today I have completed 3 more 8-inch squares and 5 5.5-inch squares.
And then it suddenly dawned on me that if I'm going to be putting together these 5.5-inch and 8-inch squares in a quilt, that I might need to have some fillers. So I thought I'll make some 3-inch squares, so the multiples of the 3 inches hopefully will fill any gaps.
And I've also started making those 3-inch squares. So in the end, I managed to make 12.
And we've already established by now, haven't we, how good I am at problem solving. So fitting a few blocks together, that's not going to be an issue, is it? Sometimes there's an expression that you make that you sometimes wish you could take back. That was one of them.
And that's what's left of the white now. So a few trimmings, a few pieces still to process, tidy away those wallets, and I'll move on to my next project.
And I'm not really sure what my next project is going to be at the moment. I think I'm just going to have a good old tidy up. I'm going to go and visit my nearest and dearest and take them some little Easter gifts. So if you're still here, thank you, and remember, when things go badly in the quilting world, you're not alone. And it's only fabric and thread, and we can always make another quilt, and we can always unpick. So have a lovely weekend. If you celebrate Easter, have a lovely time. Thank you very much for watching. Take really good care of yourselves, and I will see you next time. working out.